All right, everyone, welcome along to episode 3 of Lifting in Life. It's been a minute since the last episode for reasons that I'm sure we all are very familiar with that we're not going to get into the wormhole of. But a very special episode 3, we've actually got our very first guest. So I'm going to pass you on to Cam, who's going to do a bit of an introduction and we can go from there.
So our first guest, we're very grateful to have him on, is Matt Devonport.
Hey guys.
We both met at work and we sort of bonded over the gym and heavy metal music, and then after a few conversations it's come to fruition that we have him here on the podcast. So we're very grateful to have you on. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, Matt?
Cool. Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Josh. And thank you for inviting me to this podcast.
No, thank you for joining us.
Yeah,
Thank
cool.
you.
Cool. Yes, this is my first podcast, so bear with me if it is a little rough or whatever.
Yeah, we're really experienced too. So
Absolutely.
we've done 2 whole episodes so far. So
For sure. No, it's good. And that's why I want to do it too, because listening to the first couple of episodes definitely in line with what I'm into with the gym and life and its challenges and then how to overcome them. So I feel I've got like a little bit of a story from growing up into my ripe old age of 32 at the moment. And,
Nice.
We can definitely talk about my journey and branch into topics from there. But so yes, I am 32, currently living in Wellington, work as a software engineer for Xero, and that's obviously where I met Cam as well. But I grew up in Gisborne initially, so I was born in Gisborne, grew up there until I was about 18, and then moved down to Wellington for 3 years, studied at Vic Uni, but down a bit of motivation issues, which we can talk about as well down the line, and then moved back to Hawke's Bay, where my father became the coroner, so moved from Gisborne, and his job was based in Hastings, so moved to Havelock North, and pretty much spent 10 years roughly around Hawke's Bay, with a slight detour back to Gisborne for a few months, but we can talk about that too. But yes, and been in Wellington now just over a year, so majority of the time has either been Gisborne or Hawke's Bay for my life, but yes, now living in the big old city of Wellington and enjoying the fruits, not quite the same fruits as Hawke's Bay, being quite a produce and
Nice.
you know,
The
a
literal
lot of sun.
fruits,
That's what
yeah.
I'm missing quite profusely here in Wellington in comparison, but no, it's good. Very, very good and very happy to be here.
Since we're covering your background as well, do you want to maybe just tell us a bit about your music background?
Okay, yeah, cool. I'll definitely branch into it more, but currently I drum for a band called Misanthropy, which is a band that covers a metal band called Death. I'm not too sure how familiar people are with that band, but they were one of the first pioneering death metal bands back in the 80s. I think 86 is when they first started.
Suitably titled band. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fitting.
And unfortunately, the band with the predominant member getting cancer and passing away due to things after that, he just stopped the band completely, but their music's quite legendary and iconic, so I got offered to join this band. I currently drum in that band. There's currently in talks of a couple of other bands at the moment, but I've been dealing with work quite a lot and moving into Wellington, so I've kept that on ice, and I've just kept this cover band, which I thoroughly enjoy doing. Moving at the moment and slowly dabbling in electronic music, mainly sort of like dark synthwave and groovy. If you think of like say Blade Runner soundtrack and soundtrack, but groovier and just real amazing melodies. And
It'd probably be easy for us to talk about music non-stop for an hour.
yeah.
The one thing I will say is there's so many similarities in that style of music to intense drumming, fast-paced kind of drumming, and that's ultimately what got me into drum and bass as well. So I can definitely understand that crossover.
100%. And with dark synthwave, there's a lot of metal influence as well. And as I'll talk about, definitely got influence heavily in that genre just due to the people around me mainly and picking up the things from the genre. But my favourite artist is a guy, his name's James Kent, or Perturbator is the stage name, and he was in like black metal band previously and takes a lot of those elements as well from metal. So you're right, it's sort of an easy way to branch out of metal was to go into this. So
Absolutely,
yes.
I guess the fitting place to start as well as your music is also your gym and your training. So in your growing up in Gizzy or the Hawke's Bay, where did the gym and training start to fit into your life?
Yeah, definitely. If you'd like, I can sort of give like a brief introduction of like the time in Gisborne and briefly talk
100%.
about sort of how the gym and music coincide in that. So so I grew up in Gisborne. Let's say, the gym didn't start for me until I was 18, so we'll get into that later. But I grew up in Gisborne. My father was a lawyer in Gisborne. My mother worked at a bank. I've got one sister. And I wasn't very musical. I remember like listening to a lot of my dad's CDs and things, but I couldn't like pick out things well or whatever. I definitely enjoyed music, but I wouldn't say that I was naturally gifted off the bat. But I did do a lot of speech and drama growing up, so I definitely had that performing background there, which was sort of easy to transition to. But I grew up in Gisborne. I wouldn't say that I was great at all the academic things, but I was a high achiever in different areas as well, and I took pride in doing the best I could at what I liked, and continued to do speech and drama until I was about 12, until I was 14. So I was doing it in my first year of high school, and the school knew I did drama and everything like that, and when I was at 14 at school, there was only one option between the two. It was either drama or music. And I didn't play the drums, hadn't even played a drum kit, but I was just so passionate about playing drums. Like I listened to say bands like Slipknot and like tapping the keyboard, and it was coming out of me. And when I was doing speech and drama, I was doing well. Like I got placed second at a regional competition and things like that, and that was going well. But I just had so much anxiety and just did not want to do it. And I remember saying, cool, I want to do music. And I remember the principal of my school coming and saying like, hey Matthew, I think you're not making the best decision here, etc. Yeah. And I said, no, I want to do this and do that. But actually what they catered for me and one other student, a gentleman by the name of Regan, who's one of my best friends and has been growing up as well, we both were allowed to take both. So I was able to do drama and music, which was quite cool.
Why was it put to you that you did have to choose between the two? Was it just a resource thing? Or?
I believe so. Because they catered the timelines or whatever. I'm not sure exactly that. And I was 14 and just like, like things are happening around me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Logistics of things. But yeah, I think it was just how they set it out. And it was probably at that point, because I'm 32 now, so 2002?
Yeah.
When now I feel you can cater around, different subjects, or arts might be tied together, so keep those separate, where before you'd be like, well, everyone would have to do maths and these
mandatory subjects,
where potentially nowadays if you're more of an arts student, they'd probably cater more.
Sure.
That's just an assumption, but back then it was like you do music or you do drama, and that was the black and white.
No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
What was causing your anxiety around that time as well? Was it the actual performance, the performance aspect, or was it just the sort of those nuances of being a teenager and all the pressure? What was it that was kind of triggering that?
I think definitely it was more the motivation around it too. For me, it was more prepping. Like when I would say if I was performing and I was speaking, I wasn't really enjoying it. Like I could do it, and at that point, like decent at it, but I wouldn't enjoy it. So to learn was just like pushing a big load of a weighted barrel, rather than being very easy to motivate myself, if that's a decent analogy. Where I just, as I said, just found with music, like it was just screaming out of me. And I definitely like performing, and I definitely like that sense, but it just was very hard to motivate myself. And at least in the band and what I've been in, it's been people around me as well, where I did a lot of solo performances with speech and drama, so I could sit, and especially with the drums, sit on the back a bit, and just at that point, that's how I felt mentally, I guess.
Yeah, that totally resonates for me individually as well, because DJing was, when I discovered it, it was very much like I had that performance energy that you've described, and it was flooding out of me like you've described as well. But it wasn't like, being the singer in a rock band where like you are very much expected to
front and center.
Exactly, yeah. I didn't even see for that. I could just basically play records and thrash out a little bit in the background, similar to what a drummer does, where they're absolutely critical to what's going on, but you've also got this kind of insulation between you and the audience that gives you your own personal space.
Absolutely. Yep. I guess it probably wasn't instinctively in me when I got drawn to the drums. It was like all the beats and things like that as well. But definitely like sitting in the back, and that I had and still get less performance anxiety. I very rarely get it now, but back then when I was drumming, in comparison to speech and drama and trying to put on an act, like someone's an American accent or whatever, didn't feel natural. And I'm happy with the path that I took at that point. I still did speech and drama. I was in, say, like Oliver the musical when I was at high school, and other performances like Pinocchio and things, so still kept it going a wee bit, but definitely got into the drumming side of things. And it's funny because we've mentioned with Cam knows the band Saving Grace, and Vasili's prominent member in that. He actually taught me my first drum beat, so he's a guitarist.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So he came along to school, and I was like, yeah, man, I want to play the drums, and he's like, oh, yeah, cool, and he taught me like my first beat, yeah. And so I was 14, and I just hogged the drum kit, man, like. Other my mates too, like literal mates, would be like, "Oh, I want to come play drums." I'm just like, no, and I'd just be on it, man. And to the point where like the teacher told me off, and I remember getting so upset about it. Like,
I take it there was only one kid at your school, kind of thing.
Only one kid. Yeah. So I was a bit selfish in that sense, but
you got to do what you got to do when you got that bug.
Passion. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so I was 14, started getting into to drums, and then sort of as you like grow up, there's sort of some challenges and things that you come across, and I had quite a few, and wouldn't say I was like sort of the happiest kid at school, but I was definitely drawing more away from the academic side of things. I was doing pretty well at maths and some things like that, but was more into the arts, and at that point too, and I thought it'd be a good thing to bring up too, is I grew up playing video games, and predominantly say like Doom and things like that, and I feel that's what drew me towards software engineering currently, because I used to play that and used to use like the command line to get into that, and I thought, oh, this is real cool and like smart, and everything like that, so I did that, but didn't play like competitively or anything like that. But when I was around 14, one of my good friends told me about a game called Warcraft 3, which is a real-time strategy game. People are probably more familiar with Warcraft, which is branched after that in a completely different genre. It's very different to it, so it's not the same. But I remember I got it and played the campaign, and just being so bad to the point where I first got on my computer and it's just like freezing. I don't know anything about graphics cards or anything like that. So sort of at that point, my friend was like, you got to play this game, and cool, got through the campaign. I remember like coming across cheats and stuff like that to help me because I wasn't that good, and it's like, okay, but I remember seeing like BattleNet, and that was like online, and I remember just thinking like, man, some of the smartest people like in minds will be here, with strategy games and stuff like that. I've got to get into there. So I started playing Warcraft 3 competitively, and I've met some amazing people, some really smart people, and there's still people I'll watch that I haven't met. There's a guy called Follow Grubby on Twitch, and he's just a great mind, even if you not necessarily into the gaming as such. He has like really great perspectives. He's a great analyst, but I've met some great people through that, but I started playing competitively. So at school I was doing music, I was doing a bit of drama, and I was playing real-time strategy games, and I was even going up to Auckland for tournaments. So there were tournaments, and this is the interesting if people don't know this. So
proper
like if you think this is back in 2003, 2004, like the internet was then not like it is now. It was so slow. To get like a song, it was like sometimes like 30 minutes to download a song. There's no Spotify. These are very different times.
Start the download before you go to bed, and then you're away.
Be there in the morning.
Out the album, exactly, and you have like a full album to listen to by like the time. And it was key to get like overseas music too, because you get some CDs, but growing up in Gisborne, you couldn't get everything too, so you'd hear about these like cool like metal bands overseas.
It was the same for me in Oamaru growing up, small town. We had to drive to Dunedin to get even quite big stuff. Like I remember going to Dunedin to get a 9 Inch Nails album. And like
which one do you remember?
I was Downward Spiral. It's Trent Reznor's biggest album, and it was also quite widely established, not on a mainstream level, but as close to mainstream as you can get while still being underground and industrial.
Definitely.
And I couldn't buy it locally. I had to literally go to another city.
So how far was the drive to get it?
It was an hour and a half, which is, kind of a step.
Imagine that to get like Spotify nowadays.
Spotify, YouTube, like anything.
Yeah. But without going down that tunnel too much, that's what makes me appreciate Spotify so much. Is like, I remember when I was still drinking, there was times where I'd be a little bit smashed and I'd pull out my phone and be like, fuck, I love this. This is so awesome. I've got such an appreciation for it because I was, undersaturated for so many years.
It's we didn't know any different, man.
Yeah.
We knew how annoying it was, but we just didn't know any better like, at that point. Do you like the album Pretty Hate Machine?
Yeah.
Look, that's my favorite.
All of 9 Inch Nails back catalogue, But it was like every sort of few months we'd have to go down to Dunedin and collect something. So it was, I can definitely understand being Gisborne was the same. I'm hearing from you, like it was very much just.
Precisely.
Once you got that illegal download option, it was
right.
It was the passion that pushed you. I mean, there was no real sort of other than those. Remember those funny ads you'd see at the start of movies, like you wouldn't
download.
You wouldn't steal a car. Other than that, there was no real kind of overt sort of identification that you were doing something illegal. All you knew is that you wanted access to the music.
100%, and that's 100% is access, because there were CD stores, and I definitely bought a lot of CDs at that point. But the bands, like, say, we're talking like the heavy stuff at that point, like Korn, Pantera, all like the big names were there. But there's some amazing music that's out there that's underground or whatever, and you could only download at that point to actually listen to it and get access to it. So I'd be happy to like buy their records or whatever at that point, but you just couldn't access bands like this other than Korn or Pantera or Metallica or whatever. Those were like really the only sort of CDs, and the odd one might sort of slip through that's pretty decent. But it's just, and even still sometimes nowadays the internet's the only way that you can access. But it's good that there's platforms like Bandcamp where bands can actually go like, here's our music and you can pay for it like this way, etc. Or Spotify or whatever. You don't have to like download and
you don't have to don an eye patch and call yourself a pirate.
Spotify does rip off the artist, but we won't get into that, unfortunately. So it's a pretty similar boat, but so video game tournament. But the way this is, because there's a thing called World Cyber Games, but there was an event in Auckland called X-Lane, and it was about like, I think about 1,000 people. I can't quite remember now, and it was like the ASB Stadium or whatever up in Auckland. So it's like this big arena that you'd play basketball in, and it's just like tables, and it's
That's
just
impressive,
nerds,
man.
like, it's just nerds like me, you know what I mean? But part of it though, and what helped fund it, was because there's the competitive side, but maybe probably about 200 people there would be there for the competitive side, and then it was just the mass sharing scenario, man, because there was just 800 people, and people would like even get in the forums, I'm going to download this because speeds are terrible. This is the context of it. I remember that there was a guy like opened up his PC and he's like, there's 2 terabytes of storage in here, and we were just like, what?
Whoa.
Like that's the, and these times, but people went there for mass file sharing, and that helped fund it. Because nowadays these tournaments don't exist, unfortunately. It's all generally online, or they're like overseas. Somewhere like New Zealand can't cater for that, because why go to this event to mass file share when we've got like, fibre, etc.
Yeah, so it defeats the purpose, doesn't it?
Or it just killed that scene, essentially. But yeah, that's what I was doing. So I continued with music, went into RockQuest, got placed 3rd at the regionals. When I was 5th form, so a year after I started music, got merit in music, and then I got colours, which is the highest award you can receive at the school, in both 6th and 7th form. And it came to 18 years old, and I was like, cool, what am I going to do? And I had no idea what I wanted to do. I was still a very lost kid. As I said, I wasn't focusing on academic subjects as much as the arts. I had this band, I was playing these computer games competitively, but it's nowhere near the scene of what it is now, where you can make money. There's a lot of tournaments and make money through tournaments online. There was no Twitch to like stream and get money and things like that. Yeah. So like, cool. I was like decently skilled at this game, but there's just no real
not much opportunity.
Make money off it at that point in time. There's other people that stuck to it and have done well, etc., and that's really cool. But there was a lot of risk, and my parents were like, "There's nothing in this," so getting pressured off that. And I got university entrance, so I could go to university. I did enterprise studies, so like business studies at school that year, and that was probably the most academic sort of thing, so that I focused on and did well with that, and went to like this sort of competition thing again in Auckland for that, but that was very different, and that was really cool. But I came to the end of 18, I was like, what am I going to do? And I had this band, and I wasn't enjoying the band as much, but I thought, well, I'll keep this going and see where it goes. And then unfortunately the band broke up due to internal conflict, not to do with me. And so I was just like, well, my path seems set. I won't say why, but it's definitely, I wasn't looking at, let's just say that. And I was like, well, university is anywhere I'm going. So started going there. At that point was still competitively gaming, but then about near the end of the year just stopped doing that. I couldn't really drum in the hostel and things like that, so I started losing music.
What did your social life look like at the time? Like throughout this period, what did your sort of friend group and social life look like at the time, to paint more of the picture?
Yeah, so I was at school, so like it was just general school stuff, Like,
just wondering what like influences you had on you in terms of like whether it was music or gym or academic or go to uni or like do a trade or... Yeah,
so the reason why I got heavily into music and drumming too was my cousin was in Saving Grace, the band I talked about previously. So I know like pretty much all the members that have been through Saving Grace either know of or like have talked to, etc., or still talk to. And my cousin was a member of Saving Grace. He was a drummer for 2 albums, namely Behind Enemy Lines and Unbreakable. And that's how I got the passion, I feel, of drumming, because I'd come around, all his mates were there, and he'd just be like tapping on pillows and like, this is how you do this. And like, and he was the closest thing to a brother for me, and very charismatic, like one of the most warm, like respected guys, I feel like, sort of in our age group around Gisborne, and like that's subjective or whatever, but he's extremely charismatic and just a funny dude. He is a great guy. I haven't talked to him, unfortunately, in quite a while, just due to some reasons, but again, out of my hands, but it's all good. But yes, so heavily influenced by him, and that's where I got my main music influences from. Was through that, and then continuing with the scene. But I was definitely more of a rock drummer rather than a metal drummer. I was listening to like Tool and Deftones, and a lot of rock music. I'd probably call myself at that point a metal drummer, because I was clueless, and I'll probably
everything
say
was just metal.
Yeah, everything was just metal. Then I was a bit of an egg as well. Like I was quite egotistical through school and stuff. So I was like a nice guy, but then because I was very competitive, so I was just like, oh yeah, like I'm definitely a metal drummer, but not like.
Well, I don't know how anyone else could have competed with you anyway if you weren't letting anyone else use the drums. So.
Exactly. Oh, exactly.
No
that's how I knew I could reign supreme, right? Lock
Yeah.
everyone out of practice.
And then when it comes to competition time, you're like,
Only I
can
can practice.
I have to say, there were some excellent drummers at the school around me as well. Like that was probably my age. Like no one my age I sort of blocked from doing it. But there's definitely some great drummers around the school and things like that. But
I think small towns produce that quite a bit as well. Like I knew a few people that play guitar since I was 13, and you do. There's a song by the Streets, Geezers Need Excitement, and I often refer to it when I think of the small town antics of teenagers. They do need to find something to channel their sort of aggression or their anxious energy into, or whatever. And music's always the obvious solution. Like music
100%.
doesn't judge you for the things you're insecure about. If anything, it makes you feel more comfortable about who you are, and more kind of like there are people out there that you can resonate with who are like
100%.
vocalizing how you feel about things. So yeah.
Definitely. Like I use heavy metal as like strength. Like you just got that energy there. Like
100%. Yeah. Which we'll get to the gym eventually, but you're listening to that kind of music while you're working out, eh?
Man, 100%.
Yeah, literally want to talk about next. I thought, since we're around 18 and the life change or whatever, definitely start talking about gym, because at that point dropped focusing on music, but then started picking up the gym. So I was like, yep, I heard the rumor wherever that you shouldn't get into the gym before you're 18. I know that's a little bit of a myth now or whatever, but I was like, well, cool, I'll wait. Did like push-ups and stuff, and I should say, like, even at this point I was playing like first 15 rugby and cricket, so I was still very sporty and
quite physical.
Like that, but I felt I was probably spreading my resources a bit too far, and that's why I couldn't gauge exactly what I wanted to do when I was 18. But anyway,
just to cover that myth as well, sorry, just for those that are listening, I wasn't actually familiar with that. So was it?
I would definitely say it's not a myth anymore. Like the common scientific knowledge is that you can definitely weight train before you're 18, but it was the same when I was growing up too. Like I started the gym when I was like 13, 14, and like you would just cop it from all the parents, like, oh, if you weight train, like your muscles are going to tighten around your bones and it's going to
stunt
your
growth. So that was the consensus that they tried to put across.
Yeah.
Okay,
But,
I didn't actually know that.
Science has definitely dispelled that myth now. Yeah.
Cool.
there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I believed that myth at that point.
Yeah.
So I was like, I want to get into the gym. And I was 18, so on my 18th birthday, I got my membership. Like in Gisborne, it was like 3 months or whatever, because I was moving to Wellington. So I started doing that. The hostel I was in had a gym there. It was like real basic sort of stuff, and no like real chest press or whatever, and I hardly knew what I was doing. But started going into the gym. But yeah, like first year uni, definitely like it's time to socialize, right? So like went from the elitist music person to just listening to like what people were listening to, like just like
The
drum
top
and
40.
bass and like and in my sense, like not pushing myself to like where I'm at the moment is like I'll look for like cool melodies and things, and like things that are really creative and good but still sound good and things like that. At that point I was just like, what is everyone listening to, whatever, and just sort of go with it, where I didn't dig as deep as I had in the past and still do now. So music was pretty much out of the picture at this point. Was gaming like a little bit, but not competitively, and I was just drinking and socializing and just trying to, because I was just lost at that point. Wasn't interested in business at university. Just like passed a few things, but I was just like, this is not really like where I want to be right now.
It's amazing how many people do that, eh? Like for the first or second year uni, even third year in some instances, where like you don't know what you want to do, so you end up just kind of guzzling away money on a student loan, doing something that you're not even really
that's it, man.
kind of into.
I think the irony of that is that it's still, I feel, better to do that and know that you don't want to do it than constantly wonder like, I wonder if I should do that, or just stay at your hometown and not really do much. Like, at least if you do that, you're like creating new networks, you've got out of your hometown, you're learning a lot of life skills. But yeah, I agree, it's quite common to go to uni, start a degree, and then a year or two and you either stop or you change tack or...
Yeah, and it usually hits you at a moment between 12 packs. You're kind of like,
damn,
what am I up to? What's going on?
Yeah, well, it's funny you said that, because we'll talk about that. And anything to add on that? Or That's cool. Yeah. So let's say I was down in Wellington for like 2.5 years essentially, and at that point, like, I was just very lost, and I had a relationship at the time, and just because I was lost, like, I wasn't creating things that were good around it, and it just wasn't a good situation. But that happened after this, I think it was the first year, into the second year, and then I was sort of like, well, do I want to come back to Wellington? And I did, and it probably wasn't the best choice, and there were a lot of challenges around that. But I came back down, I tried to go into, because I was enjoying the gym at that point, I was getting heavily into it, eating mutant mass, and I was like 72 kgs and like struggled to put on weight.
Where were you getting a lot of your learnings from in terms of the gym? Like,
just talking to people.
Yeah? So I guess the first thing is like, what inspired you or what started you off at the gym? And then two, like, where did you get all your education from?
Yeah, so like, cause I knew about like Arnold, and everything. I was like, yeah, well, that's good. And even my friends talked about, like, build muscle and that would be great and things like that, and definitely Spark. But also, my auntie and uncle at the time, they owned Great Barrier Airlines, which went to Great Barrier Island and would have Christmas over there. It was great. There's this big log house, and their side, my uncle's side of the family and my auntie's side of the family, me, and that would be in this big log house and spend Christmas together. And my uncle had a nephew that was quite a buzzy dude, but he was like, the next time that we like come here, we'll have a fight, hey? And I was like, what? And he's like, yeah, bro, we'll like have a fight and just see who wins or whatever. And I was like, oh, so you got like a year to train or whatever. And I think that was close to like when I was 18 or whatever. So I was like, bro, like, I can't get wasted from this. I've got to waste this dude, being competitive too.
I love the way you executed that, eh? Like, oh, we're going to have a fight, eh?
Yeah.
Like,
right, that's literally
like,
what he said.
Really sure,
it was a bolt out of the blue, and I was like, oh, okay. And I'm being like real anxious about it, eh? And being like, nah, like, I've got to get solid, and like, did that, and I actually did boxing for a bit as well in my 7th form year as well. Like,
do you know to this day if that was what he was he coercing you to go harder with
I've never spoken to him since the end of like that Christmas, if that makes sense. So we haven't fought.
So you didn't KO him the next year or something?
He might walk through the store right now, like,
he's been waiting.
6'4" and just like ready to go, and I'll be like, oh damn, we had a deal.
Yeah, at your 40th birthday or something, he'll just like bowl through the door and like dick.
I think I don't remember what I said.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's still on, man. Like,
careful what you say, man. That's all recorded.
Oh, that's what it is, man. If some dude's got my number, he's got my number. Whatever. Yeah, that's hilarious. So that like, honestly, that was like the push into the gym for me. And then I started learning that it was great for your mental health and confidence as well. I definitely wasn't the most confident dude, and looking back, I got like more attention than I thought I did, but just didn't act on it because I wasn't as confident. And that's like with girls, with like people, whatever, just general relationships.
Just owning the situation.
Just owning the situation, you know what I mean? But people knew I was like nice enough guy or whatever, etc. So it was fine. But definitely started boosting my confidence a lot more as I got into the gym, and that was really, really key too. But we came to, I think I was 21 at that point, and I sort of had an epiphany, as well as you said, sort of between 12 packs or whatever, where I was in my flat and I was like, I've got to move home. And my flatmates were just like, what? And I was just like, I've got to move home. They're like, what, like right now? And I was like, no, like, I've got to pack up my stuff and go.
What point of the year was this?
This is towards the end of the year. I was starting university, then dropped out, but then worked as a labourer, quake safing buildings, and then the contract ran out of that building, and they made a lot of people redundant, including myself. So then I lost my job at that point. And so I was unemployed, and then went to the Winds, and I remember going, I want to be a musician at this point, and I started just screaming music again, and I started playing a bit more bass at that point.
Oh, you were thinking this in your head. For a minute, I thought you said that to the Winds caseworker.
I did. And she was like, do you know who benefits the most out of music and that is like people who are unemployed. They, scam the system. So she was like real.
Oh, so she actually kind of encouraged a bit of sleuthing. Like,
she didn't want me to get, like, she thought I was just going to milk the benefit and just try and play music all the time. She's like, I want you to, like, that's not a career path. I'm trying to help you get into, what I mean?
Okay, yeah.
But I was just like, so I felt like sort of judged or whatever. But at that point, I was doing that, and that's definitely what I got on there eventually. And that's what influenced me to move. But I woke up and I was just like, yep, I've got to do this. So moved out of Wellington. At that point, my father and mother were in Hawke's Bay. So they bought a house in Havelock North, really nice place, halfway up Tomato Peak. And I just remember just being absolutely depressed at that point. I was still sort of gymming and things like that, but if you imagine that what I've just explained to you, like no degree, come back to Hawke's Bay, I want to get into music, but not quite there. And at that point, I was really down. Like I'd problems speaking to people. Like people at some point would, if they said like, "Hey, how you going?" I wouldn't know how to respond with that, and just really shut down.
It sounds like you had quite a strong absence of identity as well, which is something I've come to really see as a really strong value of my own.
Definitely.
Like knowing kind of what characterizes your identity, who are you as a person, what, not just what are you doing day to day, but what is the essence of your character, and the absence of that can hit you really hard, it can be a really confusing feeling.
100%, because and just the ropes weren't there to swing on when I wanted them to, with music, like, cool, and then sort of band fell apart or whatever, try university or whatever, and then wasn't quite there for me as well. I just couldn't see my way forward at that point, and as you say, lack of identity, and was definitely struggling with that too, and definitely became quite introverted. But I flattered at that point when I left with a guy called Cameron Jones, who's been on Shortland Street, and I'm not sure if you know.
Yeah, the name sounds familiar.
Yeah, awesome dude, still really good friend of mine, and helps me out, as I'll talk about in the future talk. But I flattered with him, built a great friendship with him, and then moved back to Hawke's Bay. First time in Hawke's Bay, and he's like, if you want a job, my father owns a bottle store in Hastings, so go there. It was like a pretty rough bottle store, and dealt with some interesting things. I don't know if I had a fight with my cousin, but I had a couple of fights around there, but it wasn't the roughest sort of, it wasn't the best sort of area, but I generally got respected being a smiley dude who was looking to help out and stuff like that.
Sure.
And the trouble that happened wasn't my... I can't say everything's not my fault, and again, it wasn't my fault. People were...
So that's what the session is, just to removing yourself from blame.
Yeah.
Going back
100%.
I'm not responsible.
All those things that happened, not my fault. Definitely as I've mentioned, there are some things that my fault, as I said.
It's on the record now, guys. Listen.
Exactly. Yeah, so I was learning and things, and no doubt, not doing the right things by people, whatever that point, but trying my best, but obviously that happens naturally as you're growing up. You make mistakes and do that.
Was your mental health improving at this point when you started to pick up some more responsibilities, like 100%. A job and stuff?
Well, that's it, because at first, when as I said, first went there because Cameron was there, and managed to pick myself up enough for the interview, etc. And I wouldn't say grateful for the opportunity, things like that, but there's a different employment process to Zero than there is there or whatever. So, the magnifying glass isn't as much on me if I'm an upset kid or whatever, and saying my father's the car, and sort of doing that. But got the job, you know what I mean? And at first I was sort of here you go, thumbs up, but then eventually hey, how's it going? And learnt to build conversation. And honestly, man, I'm not afraid to say that and to speak that out. I was absolutely down, man. I did not know how to engage with people at that point. I just forgotten, it felt like. And as you've mentioned, it definitely gave me the opportunity to build that back up, and it was so important and so key. And by the end of it, could definitely have great conversations at that point. Is there anything you want to talk about with that?
No, that sounds good. I think the one thing that's jumped out at me from what you've described as well is you just don't have the tools. Yes. You don't even know how to identify the tools, let alone actually have them in your arsenal. I think you and I were talking about that individually when we were having catch up last weekend. You gain those tools over time, and then when the when the low points happen, you know how to identify them and you know how to manage them and you know how to get through. But during that phase that you've described, it sounds like it was just a complete oblivion that you didn't know how to tackle.
100%. And I'll just note too, I was living with my parents, but our relationship was very rough at that point too. Like they were doing well to have me and to obviously try and build me up and things like that. But obviously, but my father was came from a very strong academic background, and mother was very similar too. Like my grandfather on my mum's side was a major in the United Nations and did a lot of peacekeeping between North and South Korea, and
awesome.
And then there's me, like lost, so they were and dad's image, etc. And
did that feed into a bit of pressure for you to be some huge form of like successful?
Huge pressure, and I knew I had the tools, whatever. I just felt like I didn't have the path. You mentioned the tools. To do it, I just didn't have the path, and then as you say, I just started dropping a lot of the tools because I felt like the path wasn't clear for me. But at that point too, I was working at the Angus liquor store, and I met another guy, still one of my best friends today, by the name of Adam Phillips, who was heavily into music, and he's 10 years older than me. But I remember walking to the rock shop, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm pretty keen to get back into drums, and I was like sort of 22 at this point, and he's like, oh yeah, now come on board, and I'm like, and I've been a rock drummer, been away from a drum kit, had no place to play my drums or whatever at that point. And he's like, no, come on. And I didn't want to like say I wasn't like a metal drummer, but everything was like, we're doing everything electronically at that point. So there wasn't the opportunity for me to like show that I couldn't like drum the stuff at that point or whatever. But like Adam sort of knew, etc. We looked to do it and then build it from there. At that point too, I was just like, I want to start getting into drums, and dad, mum were both like, we're going to help you as much as you can. So we built a soundproof room within the house I was living in Havelock North, and it was at a point where my mother could be upstairs watching TV, and I'd come up after like playing Slayer as loud as I possibly could, and she's like fast asleep because it's just deadened the sound quite a lot, and she eventually got used to it, so no noise complaints. So had an environment where I can play the drums. But I wasn't very motivated to go hard. Like I was sort of a bit lost, and like found it hard to find that fire and spark back up again.
You're probably nervous as well because like you had this thing that sort of faded a little bit, and now you're having the opportunity to come back to it, and it's like it almost feels like revisiting an old relationship, and that can be a little bit scary. I found the same thing when I stepped away from DJing for a bit, and then came back, and I was like, oh. It was fretful. I was like, I don't quite know how I feel about you at this time. You're familiar, but you're also a stranger all of a sudden.
Weird sense of nostalgia mixed with like the present feeling. It'd be quite strange.
And a bizarre sense of grief that you never quite fully worked through when you stepped away the prior time.
Definitely. And because I hadn't focused on like what was good and what wasn't, etc. in terms of that, like I just felt I had a whole lot of learning, and there were bands that some people I respected said like, oh, really good, and I just couldn't quite figure it out or whatever. But at that point, I started just listening to a whole lot of music, man. Like I lived on like YouTube, and Spotify wasn't around at that point, but you could definitely access quite a few things. We're talking about like 2011 at this point. And just started absorbing myself into that. Moved from the Angus liquor store because it was just getting too rough. Things were happening. Like great place, and as I say, like grateful for the opportunities there, etc. But at that point, it was time to leave. And Adam, he at that point was helping his father manage mobile sites, petrol stations around Hawke's Bay. So I went from like a customer service role to another customer service role, which again great because then I can build on it, but still like struggling at that point, like socially as well, and like was a bit of an egg, just this kid who just really just wants to like be into metal or whatever, but like not spending as much time on the drums or whatever, and customer service, but go like built some great relationships with people and Havelock, and loved the place and loved the people, and
just learning how to engage with people, which is invaluable.
But definitely keeping within the gym too, and like that point, and probably part of it too, is like I'd get to work, and then now an hour later just eating like 2 sandwiches, and I'd be eating bro, like just trying to get big, like trying to get solid, but I'm going there, but I was definitely still hurting, man, and like because I was this kid that had these issues or whatever, and being into heavy metal and things like that, it was very hard to branch out like at a certain point socially, if that makes sense. Like I had some good friends and stuff like that, but then like very unfamiliar. I didn't grow up in Hawke's Bay or anything like that, so it was very hard to sort of like break in. And not saying there's some like they're all terrible people or whatever, you know what I mean? But at that point, it's pretty unfamiliar. Like the internet, I think Facebook was just starting to sort of come through at that point, you know.
Yeah.
So and people weren't using the internet as regularly as they are now. So like, here's this like metal kid, you know what I mean? That's just like into that. And at that point, I wasn't a heavy drinker. I cut down on drinking immensely. At that point, if you want to talk about that, we can. Because it was just terrible. Like you'd wake up just feeling absolutely bad, and when you're drunk, just doing and saying things that you know shouldn't. And obviously, someone at that sort of point where I was at my life, I don't think it's quite a healthy thing to do excessively and regularly. I think obviously the odd couple of beers now and again's a decently or like a good healthy lifestyle.
So that's what pulled you away from it, that having that sort of realization?
Yeah, like I'm very good at acknowledging what's good and bad for me just on how I'm feeling, and I could just tell it was destroying me and hindering my health and progress with the gym. I'm not sure, actually this is a good thing too. I probably still live by the rumour that alcohol lowers your testosterone. Yep.
Yeah, I'd say there's a lot of research to support that, depending obviously how much you're consuming and how frequently and blah, blah, blah. But if you're like heavy drinker, but there'd be multiple things that would intertwine into that. It's like it would affect your sleep, because when you're wasted and you go to sleep, you just effectively coma out. You're not actually getting that REM sleep. So like 100%. If it's negatively affecting your sleep, that's going to negatively affect your testosterone levels. So especially if it's consistently in like a decent amount.
100%.
Yeah, so your hormones are completely scattered.
Obviously impact your gains.
Yep.
So.
And I was focused hard. Like I was more than drumming at that point. I was focusing on the gym, and there was a few people around there. There's actually another guy by the name Ethan Foote, who a couple of years later got the world deadlift champion for his like juniors.
Oh wow.
And he was based in Hawke's Bay, so there's a lot of people there, and I was sort of socialising with those sorts of people, at least like, you know, in the gym and yarning and stuff around there. But yeah, so I started working at Mobile, and then sort of, as I said, like with the sort of relationships with people and things like that, there was a couple of sort of scenarios where it was getting a bit tough for me, and I was at Mobile, and I was having real trouble with the next step. Like I'd felt like the time at Mobile was over, like I could do more than just pumping gas, etc. I was starting to get more confident with who I was and to deal with people, etc. So what's the next step forward? And I wasn't getting many opportunities. And sort of the people was around with Hawke's Bay at the moment, great people, but not sort of, we weren't heading in a great direction at that point. So I was like, I need to find people that are going to lift me up. And I was heading back to Gisborne sort of every summer, but I've got a good group of friends there. And I said, you know, can I come up and just live with you and just like figure things out? And it's like, cool. So I went back up to Gisborne. So I left Hawke's Bay, left living with my parents and a lot of that life, and just basically a fresh start back to Gisborne. So I went to Gisborne and then walked into Harvey Norman with my friend, Ben White, who's a great friend of mine. He's given me some great advice, even some harsh advice. And I'm not sure if you want to touch on this, but I still thank him. He just sort of made things black and white for me. He just sort of like, bro, like, what are you up to? You know, sort of buzz where, like, with me, he'd be like, Maddie, fucking do, you know? Like, I just wasn't quite hitting the point. I was doing my best for not quite hitting the point, but great dude. But I walked in with him into Harvey Norman, and I applied for a job at the computers department there, because I was like, well, you know, computers, gaming, everything like that, sales, I can do this. Like, that's cool. That's what I want to do. But there was someone who I knew there that worked there, and they weren't very motivated, and they weren't a good worker, so they assumed that with me straight away. But as I was walking out, I didn't know that at the time, but eventually when I did that, walked out, and there's a guy by the name of Kumeora Tuhaka is his name. Awesome guy, and definitely gave me a great foundation to work from with sales as well. So I saw him on the way out, and Ben knows him. He's like, oh, bro, this guy's looking for work. And it's like, oh, cool, we'll interview you. So I went there, did the interview. I found out later, like, I was the best person they interviewed or whatever. I was like the savior or whatever. Coming in and like this like kid who dressed in a dress shirt, because for my father, like, always like, yeah, cool, like, be as professional as possible, etc. So I came in there and started working there at Harvey Norman. So that's where I started working at Harvey Norman, was in Gisborne in the electrical department, selling TVs, whiteware, small appliances, if people aren't familiar with with how that works. So I started doing that and trying to drum, but I found I was quite restricted.
Just the time, you didn't have the...
Well, it was definitely work wanted to put me to put more hours in than I was wanting to do, and at that point I was just really screaming music and wanting to go professional. I was like, man, like I'm 25 now. I was 25. Like I've got one chance. I want to just try and smash this, and I just couldn't find the same level of enthusiasm from people around me.
This is back in Gisborne,
Back
right?
in Gisborne,
Yeah.
and Gisborne's a great place, whatever. But it's definitely more of a like laid back attitude, and
100%.
if I feel if you're like sort of lucky maybe, or like if you create it enough or whatever, you can find enough people to help you. And there's some people in Gisborne that do great things or have done great things or whatever. But I felt very restricted in Gisborne, and
Can also be challenging in a small town to feel like you're putting yourself out there too, because if you're different in any way, it's quite a big deal when you're in a small town. Whereas, like, obviously Wellington isn't a big city, but there's a lot more niches of certain types of people, so you can fit in more of a more comfortable way. Whereas in a small town, there's like, this is how we do it. If you're outside of that, it's not very comfortable for you.
Yeah, it's like working in a business with a toxic culture. Like, you know, you'll find your group of people that, and in a small town, there's only a handful of them, group of people that are on the same page as you in terms of like music passion or whatever, and you can kind of gang up. But generally, the majority of people are not opportunity seekers, and the attitude of 90% of the people around you aren't actually encouraging of that avenue that you want to go down. And you can fight that for a long time. You can be like, oh, well, no, I definitely want to do this. But if you're constantly hearing and experiencing the same thing every day, it'll contaminate you. It'll eventually, you'll unfortunately start to get institutionalized by that environment the same way you do in a toxic working culture. Whereas, as you said, when you come to somewhere like Wellington, that's a very nurturing city for the arts and stuff, that's where you start to realize, hang on, those motherfuckers were wrong all along. I was definitely on the right page.
Gaslighting you the whole time, kind of thing, for wanting to do something different.
Yeah, definitely. Completely agree with that. And I think it was definitely down to the environment too, because like for me, say the exact environment wanting to be successful as a heavy metal musician, as I've mentioned twice now 3 times Saving Grace. I was based in Gisborne. Vasily was based in Gisborne as well. But I feel that was created around like as we were all growing up. Vasily was growing up, and we had that scene, and that was like built from there. But when I came back, there was a very small minimal metal scene at that point, and also Vasily moved at that point from Gisborne to Wellington as well. So Vasily wasn't there. So like the heavy hitting metal. Juggernaut of Saving Grace, etc., and Vasily wasn't around there. So I had my friends there too, but they I felt we just weren't quite hitting it on the same page as well. And I knew that I needed, and just everything screaming in my head was get back to Hawke's Bay. And so hit up my parents.
Ignore that. You can try, but it's not going to happen.
And it's funny, I'll actually talk about this as well if you want. So I was like, and also, but also sales wise as well. Like I felt because it's a small town, there was a lot of competition for sales, and things weren't quite like. There's a lot of fights over things, and like there's only a certain amount of gold you can mine, if that makes sense. So it's funny for it, and I thought, well, there's going to be more opportunity in Hastings. So I literally put on my Harvey Norman uniform, drove down to Hawke's Bay for the day, went into the Hastings in my uniform, and went and said, hey, I'd like a job. And then they had a meeting.
Pretty bold. It's clear to see your confidence has been accelerated.
And
through
like another interview. When would you like to come? And I said, anytime you want me to come down, I will drive down and have this interview and just put myself out there. So yes, got the job at Harvey Norman Electrical in Hastings. So moved back down to Hawke's Bay. And at that point, still like pretty lost. I was like, I still want to do well with drumming and music, but just haven't quite had that switch. But at this point, I'm starting working at Harvey Norman, and that's when like sales and customer service and negotiating, that skill just went in overdrive.
Absolutely.
A lot of great skills, and I'll talk a little bit more about that if we need to. But at that point too, there's a band called Ulcerate from New Zealand. Have you heard of them, Cam? The heavy metal band. So they, in my opinion, are New Zealand's best, like technical and skilled and every great word you can describe a band for New Zealand.
Within the metal genre.
In the metal genre, very talented band. And some people will be like, ooh, whatever about that, I don't care. Like, I give respect where respect is due. And
we just recently commented on how most of the time other people are wrong.
Exactly.
This
is one of those times.
Anyway.
Yeah. So great. But there's a guy, people can look him up if you want. You can look after this. Jamie St. Merritt is his name. He's a drummer, and he was one of the drummers initially for 8 Foot Sativa. That's probably a more known band, and then now Ulcerate. And I went and watched his Ulcerate play in Napier, and he's just incredible. And his drumming just blew my mind at that point. I was like, oh man, I just went up to after the show to the bassist singer and I was like, hey, do you think I could get like a drumstick from like Jamie? You know, like at that point, and he gave me a drumstick, and he spent 15 minutes with me, man. Just he got a picture with him, and he was like stoked that I wanted to get a picture with him and stuff like that. Just a real humble, great dude. And he just gave me a 15-minute rundown on like how to be a mean drummer. Honestly, like he just said, look up these dudes, do this practice these rudiments for this amount of time and stuff like that, and then branch from there. And I was like, okay, so bang, man, that was me, and I was gonna be as good as I can possibly be. So I got into the mindset of I'd work at Harvey Norman, I'd get up about 7, I'd then get to work, and then work until about 5:30. I'd then have dinner with my parents, and then at 7 o'clock I'd get into the drum room, and I'd drum every single day, and I'd drum probably between 7 to 10, so 3 hours, if not like 2 hours minimum. I'd sometimes drum up to 6 to 7 hours on a weekend, but I'd drum until 10 because that was my curfew with home, even though it was pretty soundproofed. That's as much as I could do. And then at 10, I went to the gym. So I'd go like a 24-hour gym, and I'd just smash out a workout. And I went hard. This was my lifestyle. But at that point too, I was getting a lot bigger and a lot stronger and doing a lot of powerlifting. At that point, doing squats, deadlifts, and bench. And I decided I want to go into a powerlifting comp. So I signed up for it, and I was getting pretty solid, and I think I was like deadlifting close to 250, squatting about like 240, benching close to 140, 150 sort of thing.
What was your body weight at the time?
I was a big boy, so I was slowly getting there, but I knew like I needed to be solid. So like I was 117 kgs at like my biggest.
And you're about 6'1"?
6'2".
6'2".
Yeah. I was going hard with that, but I found a pretty big struggle finding the balance of like being big and strong and playing like speed metal essentially.
Yeah, because you got to be quite agile. Yeah.
And I've heard, and it'd be interesting to talk about like grinding gears in different directions, where like you've got the endurance and like, because I wanted to be. Well, I should probably explain too, is I find a lot of influence in drummers such as Gene Hoglan, John Tempesta, and definitely Igor Cavallero. And those guys put a lot of power into the drums. So like I wanted to be like my niche at that point. There wasn't a lot of that point of people around at that point I could see on YouTube where they'd put like power, precision, and speed. And I was like, that's going to be like my in. So like, I should probably note too at this point when I was like, I'm going to go hard, I'm going to go to America. I want to be a professional drummer and go hard. And at that point, I didn't worry too much about popularity. I just knew if I knew the right people that I could get in that way, so I didn't look too much of like an egg trying to like showboat or whatever. I was just like, man, if you could just see that this dude's a lethal drummer, there's no doubt that like I'm going to pick up a contract.
And that's been a theme throughout your talk, is like, I got this job because of this person, and I got this job because of this person, like networking and having the connections.
All about connections, man. You've got to do that, and it's all about negotiating as well with that too.
I was actually talking about that last night in terms of I would call it synergy. Mm-hmm. You know, each person that you kind of meet, you don't want to go into each meeting seeing them as a form of, you know, collateral or whatever, because that's just not the right way to view relationships. Yep. But with each person that you meet, provided that you're authentic and sincere and you know, a really true vision of yourself, you're going to make a good impression. People really resonate with that, particularly when you're open and you know, just really, really raw in your honesty with people. And you never know which person that you've engaged with is going to end up becoming like a vectored dot on your network map. You know what I mean? Like, you know, someone that could end up introducing you to the right person. And it's a really positive, infectious way to view life, to make that kind of, you know, that positive engagement with each person that you do meet, and ensuring that,
Well, my sister sort of recently, at least a couple of years, gave me the advice of like LinkedIn, just saying if anyone tries to add you on LinkedIn, just accept it. Like, you don't know at any point when that networking's going to work out or
Yeah.
whatever. And it's not specifically LinkedIn, I'm just saying because she said that at that point, that's when I was looking for work, and people had previously like done things with or whatever, like they're adding me, but I don't see what, and she's like, just add them, who knows. Like,
You're just generating the opportunity for opportunity. Yeah.
precisely, yeah. And we'll talk, it's probably a great, like, did you notice how this is flying out? Because
Vibing out.
Segue.
definitely, man, because at that point I was ignoring opportunities, because you can see at that point of that lifestyle in terms of like really getting to know a girl and investing in that, like no way, like I was drumming a lot of the
Tunnel
time, you know
vision.
what I mean? Exactly, like I obviously had girl mates or whatever, anything, but like at that point where it could have opened up to something, I'm just like, this is my schedule, do you fit in? No, I understand it's very selfish, so don't worry about it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that was 100% my mindset, because I was like, don't worry about that, man, like who cares if I'm 40 or whatever at that point, and
Yeah, your priority, yeah.
and find a girl at that point or whatever, you know. I was just like, I want to be a lethal drummer and go overseas. I'll just have to take a quick drink of water.
There's a really powerful lesson in that, though, and I think it's something that everyone should do at one point in their life, is actually commit everything they can to something and just see how good and just see how good you can get at it. It doesn't necessarily mean you need to shut off everything, but sometimes it can be too overwhelming to commit to one thing. So it's actually quite like inspiring, I suppose, to see how tunnel vision you were for something.
We won't talk too much today about COVID, because I'll try and go into that eventually, but I think that's probably gave people an opportunity, at least a glance at that too, because obviously people were restricted, they couldn't be outgoing, so they probably did focus a bit more on that. But that's a great point, and we can definitely get to that. But so I was drumming a lot, looking to go professional. Wasn't in a band at that point, so going into this, but I was definitely more into the gym and going towards this powerlifting, but still drumming a lot. But suddenly get a few like injuries, especially with like wrists, because I'm like trying to get up to 220 BPM of like single notes for like 3 minutes, you know, and then like bench 150 kgs or whatever, you know. So I did this powerlifting comp and got placed third, but it was a smaller comp, and it was like a Snap Fitness essentially powerlifting comp. But did all this work, got third, and just felt completely underwhelmed. Like I've just put my body through so much. Like I was just eating so much and like sitting on the toilet trying to get it out. I'm like in pain, honestly, and I'm having to say it, like, and just like forcing food down me, because that's what I needed to do, like to do the training, and I just felt terrible. So
because of your placing, you were like,
I could have got first, man. I could have got first and like 10 grand, and I still would have like felt like it wasn't worth it. Like I felt like I put my body through like hell to in a small amount of time to like for this competition and things like that. Loved the gym still and everything like that. At that point, definitely burnt out. But I was just like, because I was like, oh, is this like my path as well? And I was exploring the gym while still and competitive, you know, powerlifting, while doing my drumming to see like, oh, what's, you know, if this rope goes, then there's another rope or whatever, as well as customer service. But just felt just completely underwhelmed by it. So I took a big break from the gym in terms of I lowered it down a bit. Actually, I didn't take a big break, but I definitely toned it down, and I just changed my diet, and I went from 117 kgs down to 98 kgs, and was just like in the best like shape I've been in. I feel like right now I'm in the worst, but that's because of like lockdown and just a bunch of stuff. But that's fine. But at that point, like I was feeling really good, and then I was like, really digging into music at that point, and I was still at Harvey Norman and doing that, and going great with that. I'm just trying to think if there's too much else I need to say in between there. No, so working there, I was toning back the gym a lot in terms of competitive powerlifting. I was just really maintaining and keeping strength as much as possible. But getting straight into music and doing that, and started to get a whole lot better, because I was just, as I've told you, like my schedule, man, like you put that over 3 years, like you'll just rapidly increase.
So that was 3 years you were doing that schedule.
3 years, like even more, bro.
We'll just get to 3 years. Man.
We'll get to 3 years, and then we'll sort of stop there. So it's about like maybe 2 to 3 years. At some point, I started putting videos up on YouTube, and they were just mainly like sort of thrash stuff. And this person who I didn't realize actually lived in Havelock was like, "Oh, great! You should like play this death stuff, you know, from the band." I'm like, bro, I'm not as much into like the death metal stuff as I am thrash. Like I just love like thrash metal at that point. And he's like, nah, it's sort of the earlier stuff is a bit thrashy or whatever. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll test it out. And then just loved it. Like, just loved this band and loved the challenge. And there's different time signatures. And as I have grown into the band, got into a lot of the harder stuff. And it's like real jazzy and crazy technical. And I'm still learning a lot of the songs. Got a bunch under my belt, still learning a lot with it. But joined this band. So joined this band and I was like, oh, yeah, this is great. And this is all going well and everything like that. And we started playing a few shows, which was really cool. Just before that, I should mention I did an EP with a guy called Andy Chandler, who was in a band over in Finland called Morse Principal Mess, based in New Zealand. Other bands like The Marker Man and a few others as well. And hit him up and did this, but he wanted to put it on ice while he was working his own things out, coming back from Europe and things like that. So I had that there. Musically, it's still on Spotify if you want to check it out. The band name's called Your Sad Existence, and it's tongue-in-cheek, so don't worry.
Yeah,
and it's the name of a song from a band. And the EP's called Killer, and it was Killer like as in killer, but also killer to fit in with because it's a death metal, thrash metal, no vocals, but definitely the instruments fit in with that, so it all like fell in line with that. But doing that and started playing some shows around Hawke's Bay and things like that, and then we had our first show in Wellington 2019 it must be. So at that point I was like working in sales, going to the gym and maintaining and things like that and still keeping pretty strong. And focusing on this band really and still pushing to do music. And I was streaming actually live at this point. So I started getting on Twitch, which is great. So that was around. I wasn't really gaming, like streaming anything like that. So I was on Twitch doing a little streaming. And at that point I was playing a few of the Death songs, but then like taking requests and things like that. But I'll touch on this too. I didn't really thoroughly enjoy it. Like I found there's a lot of drummers that were on there that would say, oh yeah, like play a song and pay me to play a song which isn't theirs, and then they'd sort of half like play it and just sort of go along, but not like, I'm just like, man, if it's not like as close as possible to it, like that just means nothing to me.
That's kind of the internet in a nutshell though, as far as like streaming your profession goes. Like you do get a lot of it's about for a lot of people it's about having a stage. It doesn't really matter about what quality they're at. I saw it a lot with people that were streaming, drum and bass sets up. It's just how it goes really. You've got to actually dig to find the real sort of talent in there.
100%. I got to the point as well where I just went, cool, I'm not taking any requests. I don't want any donations. I don't want anything. This is just like great for me because I'm playing in a live environment from my home and I can engage and like slowly build up the audience, etc. that can like help me. Like if I went to a band that said, hey, like I feel like I'm an amazing drummer or whatever, and then like got 0 followers, zero, then it's gonna be, well, what the hell? But if I've got like a little bit, then like obviously that's
how helpful. Did you find the interaction with the chat, like when you're playing and then you have a break between songs or something? Like, were you quite interactive with them? Or?
Yeah, I'd always try and talk and always just be as genuine as possible. And a lot of my mates were there too, and they'd like troll a bit, and they're pretty funny.
Standard.
So shout out to them. And they're funny as, and it got to the point where like even like people were donating $300, man, to me. Whoa. And it just got like stupid because I then feel like I have to learn a song I didn't really want to learn and stuff like that. And I was just like, bro, I don't want to do any of that. Just stream how I want to. So I was streaming, and then as I mentioned just before, got the opportunity to play my first show at Valhalla in Wellington with the band, which is great. And that was on the 19th, I think, of January 2019. So did that, came back to Hawke's Bay, and normally I think it was a Tuesday, Monday now, sort of like this is getting into a sort of very dark time in my life. I can't remember exactly, but it was either Monday or Tuesday I was meant to work, and I managed to get the day off. And also my car had been hit as well by somebody, so my car was at the panel beaters, but on that day I sort of woke up late because I was pretty tired after packing this huge drum kit that I've got like all the way down to Wellington, bringing it back up and like late nights, etc. But basically sort of eventually got up and got some breakfast, went down to my computer, and so I'm sitting on my computer, I'm watching Twitch at this point, eating breakfast, and then I hear a guy scream for my mother's name like from the door, and I'm just like, what's that? Is it Dad? And I go there and I see my neighbour, at the door, and he's like screaming, Chrissy, Chrissy, which is my father's name. And then he's like, Matt, your father's in trouble. And then I look and I see my dad's been outside, and he's now on the concrete, and he's sort of not in a really good state. So I go down, and he's basically snoring. He's unresponsive, and I see that he's been up a tree, pruning a tree, and the ladder's obviously sort of slipped or something like that. So I'm there in a scenario of my father just basically with a big head injury, unfortunately. And then I go to get mum, and then mum's sort of like, what's happening? And I'm just sort of like wondering what's happening. I then get told to sort of do things in that situation, but my father's not responding to anything that I'm doing. So I'm dealing with that essentially, and I don't wish that upon anybody. I don't have any enemies. I don't have any worse enemies, but if I did, I wouldn't wish that scenario upon anyone. And with this too, in terms of like everything that I've like been through with my challenges and stuff like that, definitely both my parents, my mum and my dad have been great. But dad's definitely from a male like perspective and role model. Like he showed me and helped me, and obviously created a lot of opportunities for me, and instilled a lot of love. Both my parents have, you know. But I'd watch like action movies with my dad and things like that as well. So to see the person who's inspired me to go from a sad kid and negative, you know, sort of kid into now starting to, you know, get the gears moving a lot better. And my dad, my best friend, definitely my best friend at that point, fighting for his life in my arms. And so the ambulance comes. With all my weightlifting, everything like that, to get him on the ambulance, man, like I could have picked him up myself, you know, and put him over the top to get him in there. Got him in there, and then the ambulance driver pulled me aside and said, hey, I've been an ambulance driver for 20 years, just let you know your dad's pretty sick, he's unwell. And I'm just like, oh, do you think it's fatal? And he's like, yeah, it's going to be a fatal injury. And I was just, at first I didn't take it quite in, and I was like, nah, like,
well, how could you?
Yeah,
it's crazy. So then my neighbour, who's, as I said, was a police officer for 50 years, whatever, drove me to the hospital, and he's probably one of the best people in that situation because of his job, being in similar situations with people and things like that. Does a great job of talking to me and everything to the hospital. And we get there, and then I just see my dad, and at that point, there's probably things, you know, in him or whatever to calm him, but he's just sort of breathing and not looking like he's struggling as much. And I'm like, oh, that might be a good sign or whatever at that point or whatever. But there was a scan because it was a head injury in the back of the head, so he'd basically hit the back of his head. And we waited for results that came from Wellington, and we got sat in the room and said that he has a 0.2% chance of surviving this. And then I just got angry. Like my fists clenched and was crying, as you can imagine, and just I was like, why? Because for me, you can read a lot about him and sort of the stuff that's very, because his job was high profile. There's a lot of articles around this on the internet, including like a couple of interviews with myself and stuff like that. And I was like, man, this is such a great person who like inspired me to do so well in that. Why is life taking him away from this world? You know what I mean? And just couldn't believe it. And then my sister was, I can't remember how many months pregnant at this time. Had to call her and get her down from Papamoa ASAP. His sisters, he's got 4 sisters, all gathered at the hospital. Then I stayed there overnight with mum, and then the next day he was pronounced dead, unfortunately. So lost my father at that point, and I was just like, what the fuck am I going to do? And like at that point I was getting well over sort of being in sales, and that at that point, like I'd been in at Harvey Norman for 5.5 years at that point, and obviously in customer service before that, and I was starting to like get at my wits end with it. Like it was I wasn't as into it as I was again, like similar scenario of like you're sort of good at something like with speech and drama or whatever previously, but you just don't have that passion to like keep it up and sort of do it. Harvey Norman were excellent around all that. They gave me time off and as much time as I possibly needed to deal with it. They represented me well at my father's funeral. But yeah, so I just basically was like, I'm just going to play like video games. At that point, Apex Legends, I'm not sure if you've heard of that game, came out and went hard at that. Even my Instagram, because I was just like going hard at it, like victories. I was just posting like me just putting like the hours I put into that. I lost a huge amount of motivation drumming. Initially, there was just nothing for me, I felt selfish that I definitely spent a lot of time with Dad, but that I probably didn't invest as much time. But we definitely, I feel now like we were in great terms or whatever, and it is what it is. And I had my directions, and I feel very lucky that was able to spend at that point sort of 10 years in Hawke's Bay with him and build that relationship. But yeah, just did that, just like gamed, etc. And I just chilled. And then Harvey Norman were like, hey, like you're employed by us still. We want to accommodate for you, but like, are you coming back or are you leaving? Essentially, like we can't have you on our roster and not being here completely.
Yeah.
Yep. So what is it? And I said, no, I've got to come back and I've got to get some normality. Went back, people from the public, probably the first time they could actually engage with me because, again, Dad's profile and me being in customer service for 10 years now in Hawke's Bay, I know I could recognise and see a lot of people around Hawke's Bay I still would, came and gave their condolences and things. And yeah, so started working again and it was good. And there's a couple of times and I'm happy to say it that I'd just break into tears. Like I'd just go into the staff room and I'd just be crying because of what happened. It's just the way that it is. And they were very good with that. But I was still at that point just like, man, again, just in the scenario of like, what the hell am I going to do with my life? I'm taking a huge risk trying to be a professional drummer into an industry that doesn't pay well. Not enjoying customer service, like what the fuck am I going to do with my life? We're back to here again, but I don't have my dad. Like what is this? And it was challenging, man. But I was lucky enough at that point. I was like, well, the drummer's on the back burner, so like I was definitely open to opportunities. At that point, I definitely wasn't previously, unless it was music related. But definitely, when an opportunity came, I was far more engaged with that, and that opportunity came when someone came into Harvey Norman and they approached me and they're sort of like, well, they didn't approach me. They went to a surf with the Surface laptops, Microsoft Surface laptops, and at that point I was excellent in engaging who's ready to buy and who's not. And this guy was just high-kicking, I could tell. And I was like, hey mate, how you going? Doing the old thing. And he's like, oh yeah, good, etc. And then I was like, oh, are you interested in services? Can I answer any questions, etc. And he's like, oh yeah, I'm a software developer. And this is the first I'd sort of heard of that more recently at that point. And I'm about to be a stay-at-home dad, and I'd love to have this laptop so I can get contracts and make money on the side. And then bang, as soon as that statement came out of his mouth, just bells started ringing in my head. And I was like, man, I could be on a tour bus pursuing music and make money on the side and things like that. So I said, oh, sorry to like interrupt you there, but I'm passionate about music and things like that. And as I just described that to him, and he's like, yeah, man, that'd be perfect for you. Like, that'd be great. Asked him what he studied, and he said he did 3 years at Waikato doing computer science, etc. And he explained that, and I was like, great. And he's like, yeah, I'm actually not interested in a laptop. It was awesome to meet you, and just shook my hand and went out the door. And I was just like, man, that's an opportunity I can't miss. And I was always interested in it, but the resources weren't there, especially as I've mentioned to you, like about the Xland and 2004, how like the file sharing thing, like there was nothing around school software development, not like now where kids can get like little coding challenges, etc. I don't know the whole gist of it, but I know there's a lot more now. And so it was something we're always interested in, but I was just like, oh man, this is it. Like, and I was like, who do I know that's in the industry that I can talk to and like figure this out? And there's a gentleman by the name of Hamish Evans, who I grew up with, and even he played a bit of competitive Counter-Strike and went to Xland for Counter-Strike. I went for Warcraft, he went for Counter-Strike. But he owns a company called Hashbang, and he works remotely from Gisborne. And at that point, I actually didn't have him on Facebook. And then I just approached him and said, hey, like, this has sort of happened in my life recently, but also been introduced to software development and thinking about studying at Waikato. What are your thoughts? And he's like, hey Matt, sorry to hear about what happened. Don't waste your time with a university, do this course. And presented to me Div Academy. Have either of you heard of Div Academy?
I've heard of it, yeah.
Heard about it since coming here. Yeah.
Great organisation, great course. Highly recommend it if anyone's looking to get into tech. You don't necessarily have to be a developer or want to be a developer. It will give you a great head start in the world of IT. But basically what they do is they drill like a year's worth of JavaScript in you in like 3 months, but they do it very well. They have like foundations, etc. And so to do that, I would have need to move temporarily to Wellington. This is under 6 months of my father passing away. Like, this is under 3 months of my father passing away. And so I hit up work and say, hey, I'm going to quit my job and go do this course, which at that point is pretty sort of unknown to what it is now, like reasonably known but unknown. And I was just, and they were like, be careful, etc., and sort of like express some concerns. But I said, no, I'm going to do this. So I quit my job. I went and went down to Wellington. I moved in with one of my best friends, Josh Ballantyne, who's a great dude, and gave me a really good set up for when I was studying in Wellington. Drove me into work each day with him and his partner at the time, Kate, and some nice good rent and things like that. So spent 3 months in Wellington and went hard at this course, and there were challenges with that, and I've recognised it now, like sort of going from Hawke's Bay into Wellington and dealing with what I dealt with, still getting through the grief of my father, etc. And got through it, which was great. So graduated, say about this time last year, November not last year, the year before, 2019. And I was like, great. And I was just so driven, as my personality to get a job, like in the industry. I was like, oh man, like I'm going to get a job and it's going to be great and I'm going to try hard. And I applied for some jobs and it was November and a lot of companies were saying, sorry, like try early next year. We're sort of winding down for the year. Not a lot of recruiting was happening around November, as you can imagine. So I had a few discussions and I thought, you know what, it's been a hell of a year. Let's just enjoy the summer and not worry about it too much. And at that point, I'm not sure if you heard of an artist called Mark Rebellet. Like his videos was when he was playing in pubs around that time, and I managed to find it like at that point, and like that got me through summer, man. Like going through all his live stuff, and that was really good. But just distracted myself and just I didn't really code as much, but just wanted to just look after my mental health. And then early January came and businesses started opening recruitment again, and I applied for a lot of jobs and things like that. And I wasn't quite getting there. I wanted to stick with Hawke's Bay because I wanted to look after mum at that point. Being by herself, we had this big house in Hikanui Drive up in Havelock North, and it required a lot of maintenance. I wanted to help her with that. So I was looking locally, but I was branching out to Wellington as well, but definitely digging in locally. But I saved a lot of money to go to America prior to the event that happened with my father. Spent a bit of it when I was in Wellington and spent a lot of it over the summer as well. And came to the point I was starting to run out of money, to go forward. And I was like, I thought I would have had a job sort of at this point. And I've never been one to put anything on Facebook Marketplace or Trade Me like ever. I've just been, if I brought something, it's for a purpose or I keep it. But I had this watch after my father passed that I was going to use for like bushwalks for tracking and stuff like that, but I found it wasn't as ideal and didn't really use it. So I put that up on Facebook Marketplace for $400, and I got all sorts of things like, would you accept $200? But then I got approached by a guy named Sun, Sun. It's about Ian, but Sun. And he was like, hey, I'm interested in this watch, but I'd rather trade you something for it. Like he had some shoes and the bike, and he had a laptop, and I actually sort of potentially might have needed that because I was looking to do coding, and if I did want to visit friends, how could I do that remotely? So I was sort of interested in a laptop at that point. And so I was like, oh, hey, I might be interested in that laptop maybe, but I'll get back to you about this and have a think about it. 2 days later, he approached me and said, hey, I've traded the laptop, but I have the shoes and all these items instead. And I looked him up. I stalked like what he was into.
Due diligence.
Exactly. And I saw that he worked for Weta, and he was actually the production manager of the movie Mortal Engines for Weta, and looked like he had a lot of contacts. And so this is where I think like people should learn to negotiate and like sales and things, but think creatively as well. And I do this always going forward. And we spoke before other podcasts that I'm in the process of buying a house, but like even with that, there's some deals, and I'm going to negotiate like this, a bit of horse trading, they called it. And I said, I'm actually not interested in any of that stuff, but I am interested in a job. I want to get into the workforce as soon as I can as a developer. So how about if you introduce me to somebody and that leads down to a line where they offer me a full-time contract I'm happy to sign, then the watch is yours. And he was like, you're not dealing with money, just dealing with
That is cool,
what we both
man.
wanted. And he was like, yeah, man, like, yeah. So that's introduced me to a lot of recruiters in IT down in Wellington mainly, and just really helped me set up with that. And that was great. But at this point, it was February 2020, getting into March 2020. And what hit us at that time in 2020? COVID,
yeah.
the very first spark of COVID.
Okay, so we did just have a little intermission. Josh's bladder couldn't handle any more sitting down. So we did have a little break. But
It's all good.
before we delve into the next part of your story, Matt, with the watch and the trading and stuff,
Yep.
I wanted to pull it back a little bit and just ask you, because obviously that time of your life must have been a very difficult and dark
100%.
situation to
The
be in.
hardest time in my life.
And I just honestly can't even empathize with the situation. So I'm kind of interested to know what were some of the key things you were doing at the time to help you get through that situation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think key to think of that too is that I leaned heavily on my father prior to what happened for motivation and strength and things. And obviously with him gone now, don't have that. So it's just a whole new challenge. But I was very lucky to have a lot of support from my family and friends. His sister, my auntie, is a psychotherapist, so I had some amazing talks with her, and even around like what's the next step forward, etc. Because as you can imagine, that's very important to address too. But definitely the support of family and friends were key, and also again I'll talk about Cameron Jones, who I mentioned previously as well, is I won't go too much into the story because it's his story or whatever, but he unfortunately lost his father as well in a separate sort of event. But I reached out to him. Actually, I saw his mother at the supermarket, who I know very well as well, and she mentioned that she saw me, and then I reached out to him and he said, let's have a chat. So I went around to his place and we had a really good chat, and there was all sorts of things said there. But one of the key things I said and got a great response from was when you feel sad about what's happened going forward, what's the key thing to sort of make you feel better? And he just said, you don't.
Yeah.
And at first I was like, what? And he said, you just realise that it's just something you're going to live with. And funnily enough, that just made me feel so much better, because I realised that I didn't need to sort of hide my feelings. If I did feel upset about it, I didn't need to beat myself up about feeling that way as well. And he's just so true, they say sometimes time heals, but I'm always finding different challenges about the scenario, and not having my father, etc. as well. But at least I've got the frame of mind that it's okay to feel like this, and life
Sounds quite contrasting to the usual narrative that you hear, right? It's almost like you have to just always be okay, and if you're not okay now, you'll feel better again soon. But it's like, what if you might not feel better again soon? Is that still okay?
Yep.
Yeah, and learning to engage and accept that is how you feel, like kind of letting yourself feel it, don't distract yourself from it. Don't, find a way to numb it, like, because it is something that you're just going to have to work through.
Yep, 100%. Totally agree with that. If you don't address these issues, they're just going to bubble up. And, I'd sort of forgotten that point, but I was lucky, sort of, as I've mentioned, like, growing up, you learn to sort of deal with it like that, but it was a great reminder as well at that point, and at least in that context, to understand that that's exactly how I'd be feeling at that point. But definitely the gym as well, and I was mentioning my great friend Adam. He definitely helped motivate me back into the gym at that point, and getting into that, and as you've mentioned in your previous podcast as well, it's obviously a great way to release endorphins and feel better about yourself and everything like that too. Confidence, which we've talked about too. So definitely key was just the support of friends and the gym, definitely. And I started getting back into drumming a little bit shortly from where we are in the story, but I went like super hard, and that's where I felt like I was really starting to fire and put out some really good content drumming wise, and I was like, if I moved to America at the end of this year, I'd feel comfortable at that point. So drumming as well, eventually I definitely just was like, what's the point? And then I was like, nah, Dad would not want me to be sad and not pursuing what I want to do, etc., or just generally be happy. So I found the spark back in music again, which was great.
So I guess the broader kind of description of that would be, because people obviously go through situations of grief for whatever reason. It could be, that they've lost someone, or a relationship has come to pass, or whatever. But it sounds like the broad level description of how you cope with that was having something to channel it into, having something that gave you a regular kind of outlet for the sense of grief, but also a sense of purpose. Would that be
turn that pain into energy?
Yeah,
definitely. And I felt I did that early on, like in my early 20s as well. I had a lot of pain, as I mentioned. Went into the gym and just be like, just smash out that pain in a good set of deadlifts or whatever. And definitely use that. I'm all about turning negatives into positives, and finding like you can get deep into this or whatever, but the yin and yang or whatever. Then in the darkness, there's always light, and in the light, there's always a bit of darkness. And acknowledging that darkness within the light or whatever, or acknowledging that there's a big part of that is a lot of darkness, but there's always a light that you can cling on to too. Just finding that and just accepting that. And I found that with metal, you know what I mean? Like people are like, oh, it's satanic or whatever, and there's definitely some sort of elements in that as well. But if you don't address that, I feel you're not getting a whole grasp on the whole picture. And and there's people that take it to extremes, like burning churches or whatever, and I'm definitely not about that at all. Just to clarify, you won't see me
down in the Hawke's Bay. That wasn't me.
Yeah, right.
Metal's quite interesting like that as well, isn't it? Because it's got very much it's not just yin and yang. There's like a lot of different elements going on.
Yeah.
There's the dark, the light, the heavy, the soft, the sort of feeling of aggression.
It's quite cathartic, especially if you're at a live concert, man. Those go so hard if you're at a heavy metal concert.
Absolutely, but I think more than anything is it's fun. That's ultimately what music or whatever that sort of mechanism that you're using needs to be. Like it can be not necessarily at the time fun, but it does produce some kind of positive, and that's what I'm hearing from you is that you use that negative to kind of cultivate and push out a positive yield.
100%.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you still reached out to someone and spoke about it. It wasn't just channeling all of that energy into the gym or into your music to sort of almost channel it down a different avenue. You still spoke about it with someone as well. 100%. You didn't just sort of defer it.
You got to let people know when you're in strife, having a bad time. Some people will see it, but
it's probably a good call out as well. Before when we weren't recording, Matt and I were basically talking about how some people don't communicate that easily on these kind of things, and it's. I feel that it's quite paramount to say here that absolutely you need to, you absolutely should, and it's the value in actually being real with how you feel about certain things, and really not being afraid to press it out there and to communicate that to those around you and to embrace it. It's quite an empowering feeling. You end up sort of your vulnerabilities end up becoming a strength in a funny sort of way.
Definitely. I like to think the analogy of Batman, he feared bats, and that was like his fear, and then he addressed that fear and then became it and used it for good,
I like the dragon analogy. Like when you confront the dragon, it's never as big as what you thought it was going to be. It's always bigger when it's in your head and you're thinking about it. 100%. And then you actually confront that thing and you're like, oh, wow, okay, that wasn't actually as bad as what I had imagined.
Yeah, exactly. And no one has the book of life and has played it perfectly, and there's always adapting and working out and things. And I think, as I've mentioned about the situation with the watch, which you can, if you
loop back
to, if you can, is, just this, taking opportunities and being creative about it and like whatever resources you have. But I'm also a big believer in what you create internally in your mind comes out in reality as well. So if you want to shape the world around you, then it's up to you to do that and to think that and control that as best as possible. And from what I've been saying and what I'm about to say, like it's a living proof, I feel, example of that happening. So with the watch, we have I have the watch. We're in COVID. We're getting into lockdown, and I'm looking for a job. So I want to a sort of a timeline for this. So I said, we've got 4 weeks to do this. He agreed. And so COVID started settling in quite predominantly at this point, and having the talks with the recruiters and things, the optimism sort of dropped, and they're just basically letting me go. We're now into level 4 COVID, and it's a crazy time. And I'm sort of, I can't do a lot at this point. People aren't recruiting at all, and we get to the point of 4 weeks and there's no job, obviously. And so I hit him up and I say, hey man, I feel that I've had a great upbringing, and my parents taught me to do the right thing, etc. And I said, hey, I'm a man of integrity, and we had a deal, but I felt like there wasn't an even playing field due to the scenario and environment. He wanted it for health reasons too, and I understood that. So I said, look, I'm just going to give you this watch because out of integrity, I think it's the right thing to do. And he was like, oh, that's so amazing, man. Thank you so much for doing that. How about going freelance and picking up work that way? And I said, man, I'm dealing with so many things right now, and I have no idea where to start with that.
Starting your own business.
But, doing that, how am I going to, I can't focus energy on figuring that out. And I wasn't the best coder at Div Academy going forward. So I wanted to address those skills, and let alone create all the stuff for clients, etc. Obviously didn't have a problem dealing with people and sales skills, and that helps me going forward. But in terms of creating
technical
and building,
stuff,
I still needed to get in and practice, etc. And he was like, nah man, I'm going to help you through this, let's do it together. So he spent a whole lot of time with me showing his business model and what I should approach towards going freelance and everything like that. And obviously, but at this point we're getting sort of a bit past COVID, and we're getting to level 3, but as you can imagine what happened, boom, the demand for an online presence just skyrocketed.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I was just in the
actually worked in your favor.
Pretty much. Obviously a really bad scenario, but I was obviously in a pretty good position.
I feel like that's the disclaimer, eh? I acknowledge this was terrible, but there were opportunities that arose.
And that's the thing, is that you always have to pick the positives out of negatives. And for me, it was I was just put in this position, and as I mentioned, it was a bit shit at the start, but then it formed into this, and I was like, okay, but I was lucky that I was able to keep my clients with friends or family of friends and things like that, and started doing that. So started building these websites for friends and clients and things like that, and was turning away people more than needing to get work. But I was literally Son helped me out a lot at the start, but then I didn't want to overextend that too. So I was dealing with everything from managing clients to coding to organizing finances and everything like that. And I was just
that's a lot.
And I still felt I wasn't the best developer, and I got given the advice from my tutor at Div Academy by the name of Joshua Vile, and he said you should find a good senior and look to learn and develop off him for the first couple of years, and that's what I wanted. So I was doing this and I was creating websites, but I wanted to be part of an organisation, and at this point people were recruiting again because we're getting into level 2 and into level 1 at this point. This is about July sort of thing, and I was like, I want to look after mum and stay in Hawke's Bay and find opportunities. And if you didn't have 5 years experience as a previous developer, no one in Hawke's Bay was batting an eye at you. And I was putting emails forward and then turning up at their doors and knocking, and then I wasn't there, so call them, I'm outside, can I talk to someone? Oh nah, we'll call you back in a week or whatever. And then
that can be the struggle or the paradox trying to get into a new sort of work environment or a new niche, is they all say must need experience, and you're like, how do I get this experience if every job needs experience?
Yeah. Pretty sure there's a series of memes on that, isn't it? Must have 10 years experience. Can I start with you to get the experience that requires me to have the experience? It's endless fucking loop. Who is actually getting hired for these jobs? No one, I think.
Who has this experience?
Yeah. Well, at least I'll tell you, because obviously that was the scenarios I was in, so I'll tell you how what happened and how I addressed it. So at that point, it was July. I still had these clients. I was still doing that. At that point, I was on Bumble. I'm not on anything like that at the moment, but I was on Bumble at that point, and I matched with someone there. And just because of that reason, I won't name names, etc. But this person, this girl, worked at Xero, and we matched. And so she's like, "Hey, I see you into software," and she's well established in that, and I was like, yeah, great, and I was like, cool, let's catch up for coffee and just have a yarn, and she was like, I'm actually heading back to Wellington tomorrow, but next time you're in Wellington, let me know. But I was like, how I'd like to connect is the best way, Facebook, LinkedIn. She was like, LinkedIn. So I was like, cool, okay, we'll keep it professional, etc. Yeah, do that. And then I just kept hitting her up. I was like, I want to know what the no's are from me not getting a job, and I want to turn them into yeses. Like, how do I do this? And she gave me great amount of resources and things to focus on, and I definitely gained a lot of skills that way through that, as well as knew what to sort of do. And at that point, I can't quite remember, it might have been about August, September, October. So let's say August, Xero started putting up jobs again for software developers. And I applied for one and then hit her up and said, hey, like, I see this job's sort of coming to Xero. Is there something you like talk to about this? And so I think I know the team. That team.
You hit up your DMs.
It's pretty, and LinkedIn though. So
the LinkedIn DMs.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was like, yeah, and she was like, I'll see what I can do. 2 days later, I got an email saying, sorry, not this time. And I was like, man, I've had this like heaps. It's not really going to happen. But then a week later, I got a phone call from Bridget at Xero and said, hey, there's a job that's opened up at Xero, and we think you'd be a great candidate for it. Would you like to apply for it? And I was like, hell yeah, I would. Absolutely. So applied for that. Went through like a month and a half of interviews and tests and things like that. And at this point, things are getting a bit tough at home. Sort of like maintaining the house and trying to do this and get all that, and there just weren't opportunities, and I wasn't sure that I was going to get the job at Xero, but I was like, networking, I've got to get down to Wellington, I've just got to network, like this is how I've got to where I am at the moment. I need to be in that environment, so I moved down to Wellington before I got the job at Xero, and then so moved in with a friend I'm currently living with at the moment as well, Nikki, and met this person that I met on Bumble that helped me, etc., for the first time for coffee in Wellington. I was like, great. And then as I was having coffee with her, I got a phone call, and it was Bridget saying, congratulations, you're the preferred candidate.
Wow, that's so cool.
Absolutely. So yeah, obviously got the job at Xero, and just they asked when I could start, and I said ASAP, and at that point it was like maybe a week or 2 weeks at the end of October. So I've been working now for Xero for a year, and at this point, I'll say there's been a lot of challenges, like moving away from Hawke's Bay and the house that I was in into a much smaller flat and things. And and probably best to talk about is that with Xero, when I interviewed, I said, look, I'm still learning and developing and growing, and I want to find a good mentor. And I was just honest, as you mentioned, I think it was at the beginning of the podcast, if not off it, where I'm just being genuine and honest. And I said, look, I'm not the best like coder at this point in time, but I do have sales skills, etc. And I've just got the willingness that if you invest in me, then I'll give my absolute best and
I think a lot of my attitude there actually stems from the corporate environment, ironically, as well, because, I've been in the corporate environment for quite a few years now, and, you can play the game. And there's a few ways of playing the game. You can sort of be a bit of a dishonest hustler or whatever, or
oversell yourself.
And I think that those people that are, depending on the culture of the business, that are a little bit disingenuous and do tend to kind of brand themselves in a tacky, dishonest manner. People see that. They really do see it. I mean, you can. There's a limit on the roof. There's a roof on that in terms of how high you can get. People do really call it out. But there is also a large number of it. So when someone like yourself comes along who is very genuine and very authentic, it does resonate with people. They do want people like that, because the culture of a team is just as important as the skill set that you can bring.
100%.
Yeah.
It's very true.
Yeah. And I feel as well as if you do mention things, say, in an interview, and then they'll come out eventually, and what's the point, I feel, in lying in an interview to be someone you're not, and then you won't fit in their environment anyway. So it's going to be not only a bad time for them, but a bad time for you. So just be honest with yourself. What do I want? Yeah, I'd like a mentor that I can learn from, and in return, I'll provide this, and that's what I gave, honestly. And
Lying's not as easy as people think as well.
I'm also a believer that you never get away with your lying either.
Yeah.
No matter how big or small, eventually it's going to come around, especially if you're lying in an interview. Oh, yeah, I'm super capable.
Well,
hey, Matt, can you just code this for us?
As you were getting at, Matt, like that, you set yourself up because you end up getting into an environment that isn't parallel with what you actually desire because you weren't honest about what those desires were. But coupled with that, like the complexities of lying, I think are lost in a lot of people. In my previous role, I'd have to interview people that were making fraud claims with the bank all the time, and you could just see people get lost in a maze of their own lie all the time because it's never one lie. It turns into a
web.
It's a tree that branches out, and then you have to kind of remember what you've said to this person, to that person, and how did I convey myself to in that particular interview environment or whatever? Do I need to carry that over? It's just simpler and more stable when you keep it honest and truthful.
Or how's this? I go to the interview saying like, "Hey, I'm not the best developer," but that's literally how I sold myself. I said, "But like, I've got a great attitude, and you invest in me, and I'll give back." And that's they hired me with that. I didn't go and going, "Yeah, I'm amazing." I was honest and vulnerable and said, "Hey, like, I'm an investment," and that's tough to bring to the plate, but it was the right way of going about it because honest.
And even if you didn't get the role, it's still the right way of going about it because that's you being true to you. And that's the way to view it. If you don't get the desired outcome, is well, then it wasn't for me because what I am obviously didn't resonate with what they were looking for.
100%.
And that's not personal. That's just you need to find a little nook in things, whether it be your job, your personal relationships, or whatever that fits for you, that is who you are,
Yep, 100%. Yeah, and I've definitely given my best over the year with Sarah as well. As I've said, there's been different challenges like moving from Hawke's Bay and things and just a few other things. There's no point getting into it now, and potentially we could have this conversation in 3 years, maybe after I've chewed it all over, etc., and go there. But there's definitely been a lot of challenges in getting into lockdown again. The latest lockdown just absolutely slammed me. I'm happy to say that. Like, I've probably been close to my worst near the beginning of lockdown, unfortunately. And I know it's might be kind of interesting to talk about because I met you just before that, and in that I can say I've had like a real sort of tough time in there or whatever, but it's all part of it, and there's some really good things in motion now. Like, I just had to address it and had to push, and some really good things in motion for me for next year that I'll be in a really, really nice spot where I'm happy and in a good work mindset where I've had the first year and learnt so much, and starting to own a lot more things as well rather than absorbing, owning and doing. So yeah, very, very happy, and there'll be more challenges. Like, as much as I've talked about like previously, and then this podcast about and then like, oh, Matt's like, no doubt there's going to be challenges like going
just
forward.
To give the last lockdown or your experience with the last lockdown a positive spin, would it be a fair comment to put on the table that you would have known how to manage it? The fact that you did have another sink, you would have known how to manage it a bit better than you had previously because of those previous occasions you'd had.
I needed to get through it, man. And it was tough, but I was just like, just let time tick in and just like keep as healthy as possible. Like, I feel, as I said previously, I'm like in the worst shape I can remember, etc. or whatever. But it's just addressing it and not being harsh on myself about it all.
Yeah, good self-kindness.
It's so key, and then just doing that. And I'm glad to the point now where I can sort of mention this, but I've got like a contract in front of me for a potential house, and I won't get too much into that, but there's a lot of good things like that, and I know that once all that's done, and that's added to the stress though, like being in that house buying environment, and I'm independent, so I've got no partner or anything like that, so buying a house by yourself is very, very tough as well. So it's just a sort of a chaos of storms at that sort of point. But it's like anything, the storm's clear, and there's some sunny skies after it. And
it always does, yeah. It does, I think the one thing about when you're in those troughs that is what I personally found particularly difficult is I've viewed depression, whatever the trigger be, as an entity, and that entity wants control. And so when you're asking yourself questions like, what do I want to do? That entity's going to answer that question, and it'll answer it with something that continues to give it presence.
Yep.
Like, oh no, I want to stay in bed all day. That's that entity wanting you to do the thing that continues giving it control.
Yes.
And the aspect that I found particularly difficult up until, I suppose, the last couple of years was each time it would happen, I would be more and more convinced that this is the time that it's never going to leave me.
Yep.
And that would kill me. It would be like, no, this is the one I'm never going to get out of. Like, and it was so persuasive in its influence. Yep. I would be convinced, and it would just devastate me. I'd be like, no, this is the one that I'm never, ever going to be able to crawl out of. But you always do. And that's and you've got to remember those statistics when you are in that place again. You'd be like, no, I've been here. I know. Obviously there's certain things that can occur that are a lot more gravitational and impactful than other events, like what happened with your father, for example. But there is always, the storm does clear if you continue moving forward and you continue pressing yourself.
100%, man. I've got the analogy of sometimes life gives you lemons and it sucks, to say make lemonade or whatever, but sometimes when you can't make lemonade, you bite that lemon and you embrace it, bro. It sucks, but you just then maybe the heavy metal, but you just have to embrace it sometimes.
I thought the expression was you throw it at someone's head if you can't.
You could do that.
Suppose you could do that.
That's probably a bit more violent than I would have thought.
That's the metal in me as well, man.
Oh, there you go. yeah. But it's definitely you just got to embrace it sometimes. Life isn't always peachy, but you can definitely make roads to improvement, and that's key too. Is knowing that when you're like that and making the changes, you could sort of lie on the couch and it's a beautiful day outside like it is today actually, and just not leave the house, where you have to have that instinct motivation or motivate yourself to get out. And it can be hard at first. You can go I haven't seen the sun in 5 days or whatever, and for me, I love the sun, so that'll be tough. But you'd have to go out, and it's going to be hard. As I said, I feel like I'm again broken record in the worst sort of shape I'm at the moment, but I know that once I start getting into the gym again and just making those little slow steps, muscle memory will kick in, etc. And then in a month's time, I'll be far better shape and going forward. So it's really key to pick yourself up, and it's good to sort of lean on people, but not too much. But the skill of doing that yourself and recognizing it, and then just saying now sucks, but when I work towards things, they're going to get a lot better. And hope's a powerful thing. And again, leading back to my mindset of you create and shape the world around you, I'm a big believer in the thoughts that you make and opportunities, and the world will shape positively around you, as I've described has happened for me. There's been some tough times, but through the controlled motivation and effort to get better, opportunities have arose, and I feel I'm working for a great company, Zero, in a great role where they've allowed me to learn and grow into the role rather than being a senior or that sort of mindset or whatever. And now living in Wellington, and the opportunity to play music with far more people in my own house and things like that. So very grateful and very fortunate, but it does take effort yourself to do that, and not from other people.
I'd say a common thread that's come through in your story is that you've taken ownership of situations when they're not going well. You're living in Hawke's Bay, okay, this isn't going well, I'm moving back. Or I'm living in Wellington, this isn't going well, it's time to move back. Or I'm going to move to Gisborne, or you're going to change jobs. You're not just settling in one place when it's not doing well. You're also taking ownership of a situation.
100%, identifying and adapting and overcoming. And this is actually quite cool, so it leads back to this. With real-time strategy games I told you about, it's all about adapting and overcoming. You can always be like, I'm going to go this build order and do this and win, but the opponent might change things, and then you lose. So it's all about figuring out, they've changed to that. Okay, I want to go this instead. Now they've adapted that way. And that's what I feel is the key takeaway from that particular game style, is all about adapting and
sounds
overcoming.
Like agile in the corporate sense.
It is, man. It is. It's all about, this is now.
Stay away from
This is now the challenge. Okay, I'm gonna address it this way, and then something new will come in different, and then you're like, okay, identify it and adapt and overcome.
It is a good philosophy, though. I mean, again, I get a bit sick of that business buzzword, but it's
very applicable.
It's the way I live now as well. leave a buffer for yourself to adapt to whatever sort of gets thrown your way. And obviously the COVID landscape makes it particularly difficult because your buffer is reduced. But it's just adapting with the cards that have been dealt to you. And, the more you push yourself through those situations that are difficult, the more your tool set increases, your resilience goes up, so that when you do hit bottom again, you're actually kind of like, all right, I'm here now, but like, the first cut is the deepest. Now I know what this feels like now, and I know what the gig is. I also statistically know that I do come out at the other side. And again, being agile.
Perseverance and patience. Like those are two key things. But through this all too, like the gym's been the stability in my life as well. And I think that's the what hurt the most, because I'm at City Fitness, is with lockdown, they were the most restrictive, or they are still currently until tomorrow, supposedly, most restrictive gym, and I need to have like that freedom of being, if I can walk into a gym and have a workout at any point in time, because I've been drumming or whatever, and that limited me as well. But the gym definitely has always been the staple, and
it's an anchor, a constant,
and just health and well-being, because once you get into that, you're almost sort of forced into a healthy lifestyle to get the best best benefits, healthy eating and sleeping and things like that. So I think, without the gym, as I said, I've leaned on my father and things like that previously as well. That's been good. And then obviously now haven't had that in the last 3 years, but the gym has definitely been a great solid and a healthy and positive mindset.
Yeah, I am cognizant of time, but just one thing I want to say.
Honestly, I almost had to say I'm done with whatever. So,
I think just to bring that back full circle to something I was saying earlier, how important identity is. And I think that you've kind of inadvertently described that through what you were just saying about that being an anchor or a constant, because it does become a part of your identity.
And the longer you've done it for as well, the more sort of ingrained into your identity it is.
Yeah,
100%.
And you talk to, it's an instant identifier between yourself and someone else who does the same thing. It's great for your mental and physical health. Like it's a real nourisher, a multifaceted holistic nourishment tool. Yeah, which is why we, I think, essentially went down the avenue we did with the title of this podcast, and relating that lifestyle to all the other avenues and, your management frameworks, your tool sets, all that kind of thing. And so I feel like that's a good place to sort of round out, because that gives you a good idea as to why we went the path that we did.
And that literally brought us here today as well.
Yeah.
Well, Matt, we really, really appreciate you coming on board, especially with the lessons that you brought on, and then the technical stuff with the actual microphones and the setup and stuff.
Well, hopefully, obviously, it's all done. But it's cool. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Matt. Really appreciate it.
As I said, first podcast, so it's been a great experience. And if anything, I just hope people can take something positive from this and use it to create positive, events or whatever in their life going forward, because that's what it's all about.
100%.
Being the best you can be, and being the best to other people, and creating a great future for humanity.
Absolutely.
There it is.
Exactly.
There's our finito moment. Mic drop.
Mic drop.
Cheers for listening, guys. We'll catch you at the next episode.
See ya.